Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights, and let the dread begin. I get shot at. A lot. But it isn't what scares me about this job. When I arrive at a home and see someone burst out of the front door clutching a rifle, I know what to expect. They have something to lose. They're scared and they don't know what to do. So I tell them. I give them resources on fighting back. I refer them to law firms who do pro bono work, government bodies and charities that can help them get back on their feet. I speak calmly and with empathy, and people listen. Some even thank me as they pack their things up and drive away. The suicides are harder to deal with. I get at least 3 or 4 a year. And people who kill themselves out of spite really go all out on the spectacle. The harder it is for the bank to clean up, the better. And people assume the bank puts their house on the market the second it's seized. But a house can sit forgotten for years before I'm sent to look it over. Lone bodies swinging in empty living rooms, flesh like melted candle wax from all that time left in open air. I find it profoundly sad. These people lay themselves out like a spiteful diorama, and then no one turns up. They slit their throats while clutching eviction notices, and by the time I arrive the blood has dried, and the ink has faded. The worst ones don't just hurt themselves, but their loved ones too. Suicide pacts are more common with the elderly, but it isn't always octogenarians. Families too. It's rare, but it does happen. A sun-baked house with drawn curtains, so much time passed in the dry autumn heat that their skin turned paper thin. Receding lips, black toothless gums born in a rictus grin. Hell of a thing to see staring out of a crib. Each house is its own apocalypse, its own ruined city for me to wander. Whiskey in the toilet cistern, fentanyl under the bed, bills past due. And it doesn't just end with the people we kick out. These places are empty, so long you'll often get squatters. Usually harmless. Not always. Some have the potential to be thoroughly lethal. Stringy men and women with flinty eyes and missing teeth who come bursting out of moldy old blankets and indoor tents, slashing box cutters wildly at the air. You could play tic-tac-toe on my forearms from all the defensive wounds. Even when they've moved on, the things they leave behind aren't exactly safe. Fumes from homemade labs can rot your lungs, and HIV-positive needles stuffed down the sides of old sofa cushions wait to prick curious fingers. And the cooks get real paranoid about being robbed, so they like to rig their homes with traps. They get inventive with whatever's lying around. Shards of glass on spring-loaded broom handles, trick floorboards over boxes of razor blades, shit-smeared knives hidden beneath false window sills. Every now and again I find a trap that's been set off. A baseball bat rigged to lash out at anyone entering the kitchen, blood and hair dripping from the bent nails hammered into the wood. No sign of the poor fucker who set it off, just a grisly trail of gore leading out of the house and into the nearby woods. Most likely candidate is the guy who set the trap. These addicts stay up for days and pass out. Then when they wake up, the first thing they do is head for their stash, not remembering what they left behind. One time I found the guy lying a few feet away from his own trap. He kept his money in this old metal lunch box at the back of a cupboard, and he'd rigged it so anyone reaching in would get a hell of a surprise. The blade went in at his elbow and left just below the knuckle on his thumb. No helping him after that. He died bleeding out on his late grandmother's cold linoleum. What a god-awful way to go. And his little lunchbox, on the ground and empty of everything worth taking. Police reckon someone was with him when it happened. Must have gotten scared, so they took the cash and left him to die. It'd take a full month before I found him, and no one even reported him missing in the interim. You'd think the kid would be angry, but he wasn't. He just looked like he was scared. 19, going through withdrawal and dying slowly. Curled up like a baby, one hand gripping his opened wrist. You can't trap the ocean in your fist. It leaks through your fingers. That kid knew what was coming. I could see it in his eyes. Terrified. Fucking terrified. Meth is a hell of a drug. These poor guys fry their brains out in the middle of nowhere. I can't even begin to imagine what they think they see out there. What visits them in the dark. Found this trailer, once that had been rigged with damn near 100 traps. They weren't particularly sophisticated, but they were numerous and vicious and desperate. and they circled the lone motorhome out in the middle of the desert like an invading army made of knives and bear traps and stolen guns, and even a few hastily made IEDs. Took me and a bomb squad a week just to get to the front door, and by the time we opened it we were all fairly certain of one simple fact. This place hadn't been rigged to keep thieves out. Whoever had set the traps had been scared of something leaving. Probably just drug-fueled paranoia on behalf of whoever set them. But I think the idea that something was in there waiting for us got under our skin anyway. During the operation, we'd sometimes get shouted reports of someone moving around in the trailer, and the whole site would go to hell. Armed men and women lying on their bellies, iron sights lined up on the front door, hands shaking. I guess we kept asking ourselves over and over what's in there that had someone so scared they set all these traps. When we finally got our answer, the first thing we found was a meth lab, pretty par for the course. Less normal was a body that had been torn to fucking pieces. Halfway to dust after all that time in the heat had passed, but it was strewn all over the interior. Walls, floors, ceiling. Couldn't argue it was a natural death or a product of scavengers. Not unless coyotes can work a lock and key. What was left of his head and torso looked like he'd gone through hell. I'm hardly a forensic expert, but it looked to me like he'd died slowly and painfully. Missing fingers, teeth, one I plucked out. Torture is what it made me think of. Even stranger than all that though was what we found sat on the kitchen counter, next to all those broken beakers and stained chemistry equipment. A doll, not like a kid's doll. Porcelain, like a collector's item that had seen better days. Scared the shit out of me, given the circumstances and all. Couldn't shake the feeling whoever had made all those traps had done so with that thing in mind. Which begged the question, who was the poor guy stuck inside the trailer? And what had happened to him? Cops wrote it off. Meth is a hell of a drug, so they say. We all knew that. Only I wasn't so sure. I've seen a lot of weird shit. Who knows what visited that poor guy out in the wild, so far from civilization. A lot of life gets lived out in the world, out on the plains or in forests and amongst hills, far from prying eyes. You get a sense of it in my job. The sheer quantity of untold stories, failed dreams, great triumphs, abandoned canvases, well-worn guitars, heydays that came and went, or simply never came at all. Most stories follow a rhythm. Most. Some, like that doll, raise profound questions. Others aren't really stories at all, so much as nightmares just waiting for the next victim. This world is full of hidden needles waiting for probing hands. There are rare occasions where I'll advise the bank to not sell a property. They become part of a kind of no-go zone the government has set up around the country. I only see bits of this machinery at work. Whatever bureaucracy manages, it is way over my pay grade. But there is a system in place for managing the worst of the worst. I'm not talking ghosts either. None of the examples I've given so far would be candidates. Sounds fucked up, I know. Scrub the blood. Scrape the brains. Pick the shotgun pellets out of the plaster. If the next family who move in have to contend with the ghosts of a few clumsy meth heads or disgruntled former owners, well, so be it. No, for a place to be deemed a no-go, it has to be beyond recovery and an active threat to life. I'm talking factories with bottomless holes that pump out enough radiation the government has to build a nuclear dump site just to make a convincing cover. Although that is a bit of an extreme example. Most of the time we just blame it on radon or meth fumes and condemn it. Had this one place, a farmhouse where a family of 5 had lived for nearly 60 years. By the time I got there the kids were adults and the parents had been dead for a while. The children had resisted selling the family home, tried to keep up with the payments. But they had their own debts, and in the end the bank got its pound of flesh. At a glance the house didn't look too bad. Bit rundown, sure. But my standards are low. Cracked den low. Windows were intact. No graffiti. Roof hadn't been stripped. Satellite dish was still up. From where I sat in my car, gulping down a lukewarm bottle of water that had spent the drive tumbling around the passenger footwell, the house was relatively untouched by anything except nature and time. Something about that gave me pause. Shame I didn't listen to the gut feeling telling me it was all sorts of weird that an isolated house had gone unmolested for so long. I grabbed the keys the sheriff had given me and went inside hoping for an easy gig 3 hours later, and I was crawling out a kitchen window I'd smashed, the shirt and skin on my back cut to ribbons. I stumbled to my car, chest near bursting from the pounding of my heart, and my eyes fixed on the empty window frame I'd just escaped. A lone figure, barely visible with the bright sun in my eyes, but still too substantial to be a mere ghost. My wounds were a testament to that. Once the doctor had finished patching me up, I sat in the waiting room and tried calling the former owners. The siblings, one after the other. I wanted to know what had attacked me, if anyone knew what I was walking into. There'd be hell to pay if so. The oldest son was the first to answer. I didn't go all in straight away. I asked probing questions, took my time before I mentioned the basement. The guy laughed when I brought it up, told me he hated going down there as a kid because he'd hear the weirdest noises, like someone moaning. They all thought a ghost lived down there in the dark, and to keep them from hurting themselves or playing around with stuff they shouldn't, their father had embellished this ghost. Given it a name. Marion, he called her. Marion lived in the basement, hiding amongst the crates of old photos and clothes. She lurked behind the half-disassembled lawnmower, scuttling always to the dark places at the very edge of your eyesight. Marion had long fingernails and a haggard flour sack dress. She had black lips and a pointed nose and a wart the size of your thumb. Marion ate children, their dad had told them with glee. And if Marion knew there were 3 bite-sized kids living just above her, she'd come out of the basement and come crawling up the stairs with arms as long as her body, and she'd slink her way into their bedrooms using the shadows as cover, and she'd start by taking tiny little bites out of any bare feet that lay dangling in the cold. "What about that freezer? Did you ever use it?" I asked. "Oh God, no," he said. "Even now that basement gives me the creeps, and that freezer was where Marion lived, or so we figured as kids, so we stayed the hell away from it. It was just always there in the back, looking old and forgotten. I think Dad used to go hunting when we were little, and that's where he'd keep the meat, but he phased all that out before I'd turned 5. He seemed sincere, so I didn't tell him what I'd found in the house at the end of my inspection. He didn't know that behind that freezer was a false wall, and behind that wall, basement number 2. Homemade. God knows how the father managed it with no one noticing, but he dug it out and made a private, soundproof space. Hollowed out a room about the size of your typical jail cell. The furniture was threadbare, deliberately so. A single mattress propped up against one wall. An iron shackle bolted into the foundation. A dentist's chair modified with restraints. And a stain. A vague Rorschach blob of ancient browns and almost greens that pooled outwards from a patch in the corner. It had texture. I knew that stain. I'd seen it before. Residue left behind after the professionals have finished peeling a desiccated corpse off a hard surface. At first I assumed someone had moved the source of that stain. There were even footprints, but they didn't look right. Something about them made me queasy. They had not been left in the residue. They were made of it. Something or someone covered in that stuff had been stomping around down there. Until that moment the inspection had been mundane and boring. But it isn't every day you stumble across a hidden dungeon. Now I was suddenly presented with a hell of a family secret, and one that didn't quite make sense. I stood there for a good minute, trying to make the pieces of that puzzle fit. Had someone moved a corpse and gotten covered in rotten flesh, then walked around leaving a trail? Why the fuck had they done it barefoot? And why not clean it up afterwards? And how had they been so clumsy, yet so clean as well? There were no drag marks. I took another look at those prints, and something inside my gut soured. Small feet. A woman's. We all know this story. Don't make me go over it. Basement out in the middle of nowhere. Restraints. A family man that no one suspects. He'd hunted all right. Sick fuck. So who had died in that basement? And who had left those prints? Not all of them were on the floor either. With an increasingly shaky hand, I tracked a few to the wall, where they mounted the vertical surface and continued upwards and onto the ceiling. Just like that, a cold sweat gathered on the back of my neck, and a powerful sense of the uncanny ran over me like ice water. Somewhere overhead the wind blew, and the boughs of trees groaned in the yard. Sounds of another world. I could see it in my mind up there, not far away. My car sitting in the shade. Those images felt like they belonged to another world. I desperately wanted to rejoin it, to leave this squalid little hole behind. All I had to do was walk out of that basement and make for my car. Only I wasn't so sure I wanted to move at all. Felt like I might break something brittle. The notion that the creeping dread I felt was all in my head. A product of an overactive imagination, nothing more. And yet I got this feeling that if I tried to run, the nightmare would spill out into the real world and give chase. I even tried telling myself I didn't know what happened in that room. Not for sure. It could have been a game, one played between him and the wife. But then I looked at the chair again, at the cracked and frayed leather of ancient straps. There were teeth marks on some of them. I took a deep breath and regained control of my legs. Unless I saw something alive down there, I had to assume I really was alone down there, so I turned and began to walk. Eyes forward, mind steeled against the myriad of little groans and creaks that felt as if they followed me, going from shadow to shadow. I couldn't stop myself from filling in the blanks of that basement's history, even as I told myself to stop. Maybe she died first. Maybe he did. Maybe he got bored and left her to starve, or maybe he nearly got caught and decided to put it all to an end. Maybe she snuck something sharp and killed herself. But she died for sure, and she stayed dead a long time. At least a couple months for that kind of liquefaction. She lost cohesion. Skin. Muscle. Blood like the plug of mold that forms on top of forgotten coffee. I could see it in my head, her collapse. A claymation time-lapse. A riot of colors. Only somehow the natural cycle broke. She didn't go away completely, and no one came to take her away. Those were her prints on the floor and walls and ceiling, weren't they? She laid down. She died. And then somehow, she got back up. By the time I reached the top of the basement steps, I'd scared myself so bad that sweat was pouring off me. So far the only things I'd seen on my way were just old boxes and crates and ancient bits of crap. Weed whackers and leaf blowers with cobwebs and defunct logos fading away. But that didn't mean I was alone. There was something wrong with that place. I could feel it. A radiant heat. A palpable aura of hatred, even in the absence of anything seemingly real. It was so bad that as I opened the door, I actually felt a moment of childlike relief. A little like how you might feel racing back to bed after going to the toilet in the middle of the night, convinced some ghost was just inches behind you. I laughed, and something cold and hard wrapped around my ankle. A hand had reached up between the slats of the stairs, like it was reaching straight out of the world of make-believe, and into this one where things are real. I stared down, heartbeat like thunder in my ears, and slowly began to process what I was seeing in bits and pieces. First was the hand, gnarled, black, like a badly sketched shadow visible only because it caught the light coming through the open door. And then beneath it, in the shadow, a face like a skull wrapped in a garbage bag, the plastic pulled tight, so you could see the suffocating outline of empty eyes and a gaping mouth. I'd expected something wetter, something straight out of a bad horror movie. In reality, whatever was in that basement had undergone a strange transformation. I only ever saw it in parts, so I can't say for sure what all of it was like. But it sure as shit didn't look like a ghost or a corpse or anything else I'd ever seen or thought I'd seen in life or movies. Looked like a monster, the real deal, and I reacted like a child seeing the bogeyman. I made some weird, half-muffled groan of fear, and ripped my leg away so quickly that I surprised myself and got free. But whatever was hiding under those stairs was quick. Before I had time to take another step, it had left its hiding place, climbed the stairs, and was already driving me to the ground. The last thing I saw before my chin smashed into the kitchen floor was that Marion really did wear a flour sack dress. At the time, this strange detail passed over me without notice. But in hindsight, the fact that the son would later recount that particular item of clothing convinced me his father had been the man responsible for that hidden basement. It wasn't like it had been waiting undiscovered when the family moved in. And on top of that, the father must have been a real piece of shit to inject that sort of sickening detail into a story he told his kids. He'd likely done it so if his prisoner ever escaped and his kids saw her, their first instinct would be to scream for their lives and run. I didn't know any of this at the time, of course. I had only vague notions of what had attacked me. Something hateful, for sure. Something that had died in that awful room and come back to life. God, she was so fucking angry. She pinned me, knelt on my back, and howled like a banshee that had been hit by a car. I pissed myself at the sound, at the feeling of helplessness, at the realization this was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. She went to work on my back with fingers I couldn't see, but could feel as white-hot tattoo needle pain. It lasted only a few seconds. The agony was enough to send me into spasms that knocked her off, and onto the floor. That tiny moment of freedom was all I needed. I crawled to my feet and jumped headfirst out of the nearest window. I didn't give a fuck about any cuts I might acquire. If you could have felt what I felt, you wouldn't have either. These weren't scratches. Doctors compared my wounds to those left by a box jellyfish, the kind of thing that causes the muscle beneath to wilt and wither after a million hypodermic needles have turned the flesh to a porous sponge. I had to get skin grafts. I had to get rid of my car because they couldn't scrub what I'd left of my skin from the leather seats. Even now my back looks like I got run over by a mower. Still hurts when I put my top on each morning. Somehow they're not even the worst of my wounds. Just the biggest, the most visible. At least those scars made it easy to convince the bank not to sell. Normally it takes a lot of effort, but they took one look at the doctor's reports and agreed to condemn it thoroughly, pass the land on to whatever strange governmental department handles this kind of thing. That particular house has been left to crumble. No piece of paper or deed or mortgage payment is taking it back from Marion. We can only shut it off. The land is fenced, and every window has been slapped with so many toxic gas signs that I can only hope no one else is stupid enough to ever go back inside. Looking back, I really should have listened to my instincts. Squatters don't leave a place alone without good reason. I hate it here. Granted, I deserve it. I'm currently locked down behind massive, concrete walls and solid steel doors in a maximum security penitentiary. I was locked up what feels like a lifetime ago now. I earned it, I did. Every second I rot here is justice, but that doesn't change the fact that I hate it. It is cold here. I have a single concrete cot and toilet. My clothes itch and are too thin to keep any chills out. The walls are a gray with a sickly green tint due to the dull, swamp-like tile that sends a grossly colored glow into the room, reflecting the buzzing fluorescent light above me. The door is thick and unmoving. They paint it the same shade of sickly green as the floor. I assume it is lead-based to save on cost. Maybe if I lick it enough times, maybe I can kill enough brain cells to forget I'm here. I have no roommate, as many don't who are perceived as extreme risks. Thankfully, I can still have time outside and shower without being entirely supervised. More than I can say for many in here. My only commodity is my toilet paper and my journal. I earn the journal through much work and good behavior. The pencil I write with is dull and has no eraser, like that a golfer would use to keep scorecards. I am allowed 4 hours per day with it, between breakfast and lunch. I receive the journal and pencil with my meal and return it in kind. If the pencil has any pieces missing, or there are any extensive tears in the pages, then I will lose it for the following day. So I comply. I comply so I may have some mild comfort in this concrete cage in which I slowly die. Again, I definitely earned it, but that doesn't change the fact that prison is hell. I earned my place here because I killed people. I killed many people. I killed 20 people to be exact. This is the first time I've actually written it. I beat the cannibal's number, which for some reason gave me a sense of accomplishment. However, what gave me more satisfaction was the evenness of the number. 20, 2, 0, 20, 20, 2, 0, 2 to 0, 2, 0, 20, even and smooth. My compulsion made it this way. 21 would have made getting arrested a living hell. 15 would have been okay, but 20 was much cleaner. Increments of 5. Always increments of 5. Sometimes during a shopping trip I would grab a stick of gum, so as to have 20 or 10 or 30 items even. However, in the case of the killings it was much more intense. The problem was the itch I felt in between. It was a gnawing pain in my mind from 1 to 4 and 6 to 9. The itch was not as bad during 5s, but 10s were the best. However, that number will eventually attract attention. That number is partially what got me caught, but I had to scratch the itch, so to speak. It made me empathize with vampires in the old horror stories, the sensation of aching thirst that cannot be quenched. It is nightmarish. The same remained true for my age, 40. I finished at 40, which made me content. I hated not having an even age. I could force down the bad feelings my age ended in 5s or even numbers, but I always had bad years with 1s, 3s, 7s, and 9s. I digress. I understand it is abnormal behavior, but it's a compulsion. I have it manageable, so that most would never notice in a day-to-day routine. I have to reminisce on these pages because I have no way of going back. It started many years ago, and the urge only grew from there. The first time I killed was interesting. I should have felt the need to immediately kill again, as I did in later years, but I didn't. They say mental illness worsens with age. I guess that's what kept me from acting again so soon, but I'm not sure. The first time I killed was pretty lackluster. I was walking home from school through the woods where very few kids were bold enough to cross. While walking, I stumbled upon a man. He was clearly injured, and even at the age of 12 I knew he had little time left. He sat, holding his side, panting in labored breaths. He didn't see me yet. From my vantage point I could see a long, white bone jutting from his leg, which tells me the pain from what his ribs were doing was worse than that of a broken leg. That, or he was just in shock. Far above this section of woods was a road, and from what I could see a vehicle burst through railing. The wrecked vehicle, a '69 Chevy C20 truck, lay decimated some 40 feet below the roadway in the brush and rocks. I remember this truck because I wound up purchasing one many years later in a secret nostalgia for myself. Either way, the driver had pulled himself from the wreckage and crawled in agony upwards of 50 feet to the nearest tree, where his strength was slowly failing him. I remember seeing a large shard of metal which had been ripped from the side of the truck, and picking it up. I walked slowly to the man who reached pitifully towards me for help. I slowly shoved the sharp edge of the metal into the man's throat and watched as blood began to spurt from the wound and his mouth. He gargled like a drowning sow on his own blood, and after a time he ceased all movement forever. It was a rush of which I cannot explain. The excitement of ending a human life is next to none. I was content for a fleeting moment. I stared at the body for some time before taking a bloody shred of his pant leg that was hanging by a thread. I just wanted to have a keepsake. That was my first kill. I was never caught, nor even suspected. Growing up in the mountains of the South allowed much privacy, and it allowed me to get away with murder. As time grew, so did the feeling of power and accomplishment. I felt like God. No one even knew I was the way I was. I would never be a suspect because I knew to hide. I hid well because I knew how to hide. From the time I was a boy, I knew how to blend in. Sometimes it was a challenge because of my appearance, but I learned a simple skill: how to hide in plain sight. I was able to work hard in the background. I made good grades and maintained very few close friendships throughout school, so no one would discover anything about me. However, I made sure everyone had a nice thing to say about me, carrying groceries, helping kids with studying, always using manners. I graduated in the upper ranks of my class, and soon attended the local college. After I earned a degree in business, I worked hard where I could and raised enough money to buy my own rig. I worked by riding the highways as a trucker for years, and eventually bought 2 more rigs. By 35, I was a respectable business owner in my old town with a dispatch and a few drivers. I obviously still drove, even as the owner, because it kept me close to my only real passion. I hid well in plain sight, because white people love a nigger. In a town of 90% white and 10% other, I learned to blend despite being a minority. Learn to talk like them, learn to walk like them, and you can manipulate them into whatever you want. I hate them. Not white people, all people. My mother died shortly after I graduated high school from heart failure, and I felt liberated, for I held her opinion highly. Her opinions often kept me in line and respectable. When she died, I was free to pursue my own interests. My father, while a good man in his own right, never held much weight in my actions, so I walked the path I chose for myself despite what his feelings may be. Either way, I dwindled for some time after the first murder. The urge slowly grew. By high school, I kept my eyes peeled for another opportunity to snuff out a life. Finally, that day came. The second time I murdered was equally uninspiring. I found myself at a graduation party, and the whole senior class was drinking heavily. All except me, that is. We were at the home of a wealthier student who had maintained a spotless record through both junior high and high school, and wanted to go out in a way where she could get out of her pre-verbal box. I learned 2 things that evening. The first, that a well-mannered, well-educated young lady was no different than anyone else in regards to having a darker side. She wanted to be remembered for a party. Not her good grades, not her generous deeds, not her modest manner of dress, but a party. Everyone has a dark side in some way. This was the first thing I learned. The second was that if everyone is drunk and dancing on the roof, you could bump a certain young lady discreetly enough to send her 3 stories down into the concrete and make it look like an accident. She landed with a smack that can only be replicated in my dreams. This was the first time I was aroused by a killing. I'm not sure why. She was in a 2-piece, which I assume her parents knew nothing about, and her skin was pale and smooth. Her deep brown hair flowed past her shoulders, and the look of utter confusion and terror in the face of innocence was priceless. Blood pooled from her head and seeped into her nearby swimming pool. I fancied her, you could say, but only because she represented something that does not exist. Human innocence. When her skull cracked hard against the pavement, I was instantly excited. I had to sneak away to handle it and steal a memento from the girl's room. Meanwhile, the remaining partygoers descended into madness trying to repair a situation that was far beyond broken. The chaos I caused that night again resurfaced my deep sense of accomplishment that only comes from death. This was the second time I killed. 18 years of age. By the time I hit my stride, I stood at 6" 2 foot at 260 pounds. I had always enjoyed lifting weights and working towards my overall health. A fat predator is a bad predator. I maintained this level of fitness for most of my adult life. I had to in order to pursue my passion. Of course, things would have a way of catching up with me. I was incarcerated with an unfortunate mountain of evidence. I wouldn't say I covered every base perfectly to ensure not getting caught, but I felt like I was careful enough. I guess not in hindsight. I remember the day I was arrested. I had turned 40 the month prior and was on the road delivering a shipment of plywood. I was behind the wheel of my rig in rural Alabama. I was taking a back road because I enjoy the scenery, and when you're the boss you can set your own schedule. At this point, I had killed 19 people and the itch was present. I would have to rub the back of my neck when I thought about it. It needed to be scratched. I needed to take care of it. That's when I saw her. Miles from any structure or any living person was a broken down, baby blue Volkswagen Beetle. The emergency lights were flashing and a woman was looking into her engine compartment. The height of my truck allowed me to skin both her car and the area surrounding us. It was tall, uncut grass and trees, covered in utter blackness due to the overcast night. There was no one for miles and miles. We could be alone together. I pulled in behind her, with my low lights, so as not to scare her. When I stepped out of the truck, I addressed her. "Pardon me, ma'am," I said calmly. "I know how to disarm. I have worked on my speaking voice for years in order to betray their security into my hands. Are you all right?" She stepped out from behind her hood, and I saw her in better light. She was a young Hispanic woman. Her clothes were tattered, but I think that was intentional. She had silky, dark hair to her shoulders and black librarian glasses. She was pretty, which was a bonus for me. Consider it like a dinner. You're going to get your meal, but when it includes dessert, then it is all the better. I also knew she could complete this cycle. She could be the 20th, and I could rest. Best yet, she was petite, so there would be little fight. "I think the engine is shot," she said in a desperation that these dark woods certainly played well into. She just wanted to get out of danger. Little did she know. "I can give you a ride. I own this company, so I can make the time." I didn't want to sound presumptuous, but I knew by making myself a manager it would remove the creepy truck driver mentality. "I don't know. I promise," I edged in my best zip-dee-doo-dah voice. "I'll take you straight into town, and we can find you a phone. My wife would kill me if I let a young lady stay stranded in the woods." I wasn't married, but that is another way of disarming her. A spouse always makes a man less dangerous, or again, as she thought. "Okay," she said, with her fear betraying her skepticism. "Thank you. I'll get the door for you." As she walked to the passenger side, I held the door open for her. As she took her first step up, I grabbed her ankle and pulled her straight down with as much force as I could manage. Her jaw connected with the studded metal stairs full force. I know some teeth were broken by the crunch that emanated from her skull. She fell limp to the dirt as I lifted her onto my shoulder. She didn't stir long enough for me to grab a large socket wrench from my rig. I could feel the warm blood from her mouth pouring down my shoulder. I carried her into the tall grass, just out of sight. We made love then. I had made love before to some, but this was special. She was the 20th. She would complete the need. Halfway through she began to wake and struggle. From there I had to act. I took the socket wrench and began to hit her. She struggled to scream due to her shattered jaw. I hit her in her pretty face over and 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 over. When I had finished on all fronts, I took her wallet from her jeans off beside us. Hannah, I believe her name was. I took her glasses as they fell off when her face collided with my truck and avoided the wrath of the socket wrench. They had her name engraved inside the temple. I drove, leaving the scene entirely. I had to re-enter the highway some time later and saw lights in my mirror. I had been stopped before, once even with a body in the back, so I was not worried. The officer walked to the side and called me out. "You Williams, my last name?" he asked with an unreadable demeanor. "Yes, sir," I answered coolly, holding my ID and paperwork for the truck and delivery. He then spoke into his radio. "Yeah, we found him." "Officer, what's this abdash?" I was cut short. "Sir, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Why?" I demanded. I was not about to be cuffed and restrained for no good reason. He then turned me violently to my truck and slapped cuffs around my wrists. From there he sat me on the pavement and called for backup. When other officers arrived, one finally noticed the blood on my back. They then found the glasses. They then found the poorly wiped down socket wrench. They then received word of a brutal mutilation several towns over. They had stopped me initially because one of my drivers was caught with a brick of marijuana, and they wanted to stop all trucks from my dispatch to make sure we were legitimate. It would be funny if it weren't so infuriating. I was brought down on a technicality. My run lasted from 12 to 40. I was undetected for that entire time. I changed my MO. I killed strangers only. I was so careful. A technicality was the only thing that could have done this. My simple home was turned about until they found my treasure box, a shoebox of souvenirs and news clippings. From there it was easy to put me at every single murder. Every homeless person stabbed to death in cities. Every transient prostitute with their heads missing. Every unsupervised child in crowded streets. I was linked to them all. Now, one may ask, why would you be so stupid as to keep mementos? To that I would say I had to. It was my passion, and the only thing that gave me meaning. I had to keep something around. They were the only memories I could have of those times. Like I first wrote, I deserve to be in prison, but I don't regret in the slightest what I've done. The trial was grueling and irritating. Since I killed across state lines, there was arguments as to where to have my trial, but it became a federal issue, which only meant more bureaucracy. My lawyer explained many of the killings would be circumstantial at best, but just as many have my now connected DNA to the scene and are going to be nearly impossible to deny. I decided to throw in the towel. The media was out for blood, the public was out for blood, and the jury was out for blood. I had my fill, so now it was time to pay the favor forward. There was no way to avoid a life sentence, so I may as well come clean and get regaled the tales of my exploits to a room of terrified jurors and family members burning with hatred. Despite the difficulties of finding some evidence of murders, I was still convicted for 18 of the 20. However, I was punished for them all regardless. The day of sentencing, I stood still and stoic before the judge. I could feel the eyes of all those present attempting to sear me, but failing. Penalty is illegal in this state. I can only do the most with that in light. I hereby sentence you to 1,001 life sentences. He was being melodramatic. Not in history had there been such an absurd sentence. What's worse, the number was uneven, meaning the rest of my life I would have to say 1,001 when discussing my sentence. He knew this. My demeanor slightly shaken, I asked the judge, "Why 1,001? The courtroom was silent. The families, friends, and jury looked at me with contempt, but that didn't matter then, even less now. The judge leaned over his podium. He smiled with a smugness that still boils my blood, and he calmly replied, "To torment you. That's how I got where I am now. I don't interact with the other inmates or the guards. I just mind my business as best I can. I don't like to think about my sentence because it makes me itch. Similar to when you haven't paid a certain bill, but don't have the funds. It's a wincing mental discomfort. I write the rest of this in a testament to what happened yesterday, in hopes it reaches someone on the outside. My day started normally. A loud bell rang, and I stood to my feet. From there, my door opened and I walked to the shower facility. I tried to find myself at the end of the line, so as to get the most time out of my cell. I also like my privacy. The inmates here are insufferable. They are uneducated criminals who would have no life outside of these walls. My fellow black inmates gave me hell for being crazy, since African American serial killers are considered such an abnormality. The other races tended to stay to themselves, minus a few Aryan Brotherhood members casting the occasional slur my direction. I entered the shower as normal, but I felt an innate sense of dread that I don't know how to describe. I just felt unpleasant. I felt watched and alone at the same time. I felt completely hopeless and near despair. I quickly finished my shower and left the facility. The halls were quiet and the stationary guard was not at his post in front of my cell. I was alone in this hallway. Suddenly, I felt a large hand grip my shoulder and order me forward. The next thing I knew, I was being escorted to the warden's office. I was somewhat stunned, but complied. I walked the tight, enclosed halls until I reached the last room on the right. Inside was totally dark apart from a dim lamp illuminating a desk. The hand shoved me in and slammed the door behind me. I saw the silhouette of Warden, and he beckoned me to sit. I sat across from him in uncomfortable silence. He didn't move and neither did I. I would force him to make the first move. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke up. "Let's go over your file." His voice carried, a mild southern accent sprinkled in. I did not respond. He gave no indication as to why, so I would bide my time. From here I will paraphrase what was said, as my memory can't perfectly recreate the entire conversation. Count 1. Confessed. Not convicted. Man falls off cliff, and you assist him in passing. You were 12, so it wasn't included in your final file, but it warrants mentioning. Count 2. Confessed. Convicted. You confessed to shoving a young woman off a roof, and then robbing her home of a trophy. You were 18. Count 3. Confessed. Convicted. Homeless man near your college. You stabbed him and cut out a tooth. You were 20. Count 4. Confessed. Not convicted. You claimed to have shot a prostitute in Texas. The souvenir you took could not link you to the crime, and she had no family. You were 24. Not convicted, but you know what you did. Counts 5 through 9. Confessed. Convicted on all counts. You killed 5 lot lizards before changing your MO. That was smart. They were all strangled, and you kept a lock of hair. Left them on the highway. Count 10. Confessed. Convicted. You took a lost 12-year-old and drowned him. You kept his retainer. You were doing well in life by this point, but murder still called. Didn't it? Count 11. Confessed. Convicted. This one was special, wasn't she? That gas station employee who you stalked for a while. Followed her home and broke in. Took your time and did it right. She broke your perfect streak, and you were going to make her pay, right? Kept her locket as a token of your affection. Count 12. Confessed. Convicted. You took a young man to your from a local club in Missouri. Strangled him the moment the door was closed. Chopped him up and kept his teeth. Counts 13 through 17. Confessed. Convicted on all counts. The hitchhiker phase. Here it seems you just wanted to close the gap. You got sloppy. Left a lot of evidence behind. I guess because they were vagrants it wouldn't have mattered. Count 18. Confessed. Convicted. You killed a housewife in Florida. You were on vacation at the time. You spotted her and just had to do something. Waiting until her husband left and had yourself a time. Another rape and strangling. You took her blood-soaked necklace. Count 19. Confessed. Convicted. You saw a jogger one morning and followed in your truck. When you knew their routine, you waited in the bushes until he passed. You killed him with a hammer and took one of his shoes. Count 20. Confessed. Convicted. The one that brought you down. You couldn't resist her. You were too careless. Too excited. Now you're here. You took her glasses and bashing her head in and assaulting her. He took a deep breath and his outline sat back. Do you know what they call you? He asked me incredulously. I was livid. He completely bastardized my work. I had done so much, and he swept over it like an obituary column. I glared at him in the dark before answering. The scavenger hunt killer? I hated that name. They donned me the scavenger hunt killer because my murders spanned so far, and I collected odd, disconnected items. Again, my works and efforts were reduced to a joke. It still makes me sick. The warden spoke up again. Are you sorry? I sat for a moment before responding. Would it matter? He chuckled in a deep, throaty laugh. No, he said, settling in. I guess it wouldn't. He continued. I don't get it really. You're a highly intelligent, healthy, and well-spoken man. Why on earth would you throw that away? I sat in angry silence. I refused to give this man the satisfaction of an answer. Do you believe in God? The warden asked, his tone now changed. I chewed my tongue before responding. No. Pity, he responded lackadaisically, as if my response didn't really matter. That would make what I'm about to tell you much better. I waited for him to continue. Your sentence is being commuted. I raised an eyebrow in disbelief. Really? Yes, he sat, still shadowed, but I knew he was smirking. What does that have to do with God? I know I should have had much more important questions to ask in that moment, but I was curious. I assumed he meant I should be thankful. Well, he said, his voice trailing, that would make this next part easier. You passed away this morning, son. Before I could respond, his hand tossed a few photos in front of me. It was me. I lay covered in blood on the shower floor. I had been stabbed from the looks of it. Yeah, the warden, or who I thought was the warden, spoke up. Some Aryan fellow wanted to prove his might by stabbing a serial killer to death in the shower. Didn't work though, since he was caught and will most likely be in solitary until it does irreparable damage. If that's some comfort. I stared at him. I stared at the photographs. I simply could not accept it. This is absurd. I felt insulted in the prospect. I know it seems odd, but hear me out. He sat upright, ready to make his case. Do you know what the Universalists are? No. Well, he continued without missing a beat. Basically it states that everyone gets into heaven, even if you aren't necessarily in their denomination. This is heaven? I was ready to laugh. This was a joke. No, see, that's the bad news, he continued. Catholics, Muslims, some Buddhists. See, they believe in a temporal plane, so they're also sort of right. See, everyone does eventually move on, but before anyone can move on, they must resolve all their earthly obligations and judgments. Before I could remark, he caught his breath and explained further. You died this morning. You served one of your 1,001 life sentences. Welcome to number 2. I stood up. This isn't funny. I'm leaving. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to use my body. My eyes felt like they were being pried towards the seat. Please, I heard the warden, though his voice was now much deeper, sinking my gut. Sit. I returned to my seat with a sensation that was new to me, fear. Now, he continued, his voice returning to normal, you are not dead. You just started another sentence. Everything will be back to normal when you leave. When I dismiss you, you will leave here and return to your bunk. Do you understand? I nodded, still stunned by what I then knew as truth. His voice. The unexplained dread I felt that morning. I walked out of the warden's office that day, feeling a hopelessness I have never known. The prison was the same, but it wasn't. It was lonelier, darker. That feels like forever ago. I learned since then. First, lifetime does not mean from the age you are incarcerated. I expected a 40-year life sentence. But after speaking with a few other inmates serving like myself, who I see sometimes sparingly, I learned that it varies somewhere from 80 to 120 years. It varies, but it is always at least 80. I guess the guards don't notice after a certain point. Also, I assume they don't register that we never seem to leave. Inexplicable, but that's what's happening. Second, each go-around changes you. The prisoners don't notice you. The others like you have fewer words. The guards seemed always outside of the line of sight, even when they would interact. They were like fleeting shadows. I am cracking mentally. I will walk into the showers and see someone shaving, even speak with him at length. However, when I turn a corner or close a stall door, he'll be gone when I return. Next, I learned that suicide doesn't work. I learned the same way every inmate in here like me does. I slit my wrists and they just ached for a week. I swallowed bleach and had a miserable stomachache, but no death. I hung myself where I choked and flailed, fully conscious, for 8 straight hours until a guard found me while bringing my breakfast the following morning. I learned that being murdered decreases time, but murdering adds it, so no one on life row attempts murder here. Finally, escaping isn't an option. We have runners sometimes. Men, who just finished their first sentence. The guy just snapped. I guess he pulled maybe 60 years before dying in his sleep. He just panicked and ran. The snipers didn't even turn. He grabbed the fence and immediately fell to the ground. From there he shook violently. He died right there of a heart attack. I saw him a week later. 3rd life sentence. Half crippled. I guess we get punished if we try to leave. I don't know if it's permanent. He was a wreck upon returning. It reminded me of the cats in my neighborhood as a boy. The first time you hurt it, the animal twitches and becomes neurotic, but given enough time, it accepts its fate. The man now spends his days staring silently behind dead eyes at whatever light source is around. To some this is limbo, where we remain trapped in the prison in which we were condemned until our body and soul have finished their sentences. To others this is some kind of purgatory, where we are groomed for eternity in paradise. Either way, we are forced to remain, forced to live until we pay our dues. Never truly dying. I don't even know if time is the same now, but if you're reading this, I managed to successfully get these pages out. I have a handful of plans, which I cannot record. I cannot risk future attempts should this fail. I'm leaving this journal for anyone who is a criminal or wants to become one. I have between 80,000 = 100,000 years left. I do not feel remorse, but I do wish I knew than what I know now. This is simply a warning. 100,000 years on a concrete slab. A hard, unforgiving surface. 100,000 years with 1 hour a day in a dying earthscape I barely recognize. 100,000 years of sickly green floors and cold steel doors that move for nothing. 100,000 years of mopping floors or scrubbing toilets. 100,000 years of being monitored by beings I cannot fully comprehend as their burning horror erupts in the back of my mind. 1,001 life sentences. 1,000 to go. Only one small thing gives me comfort. With 1,000 life sentences, at least it's a nice, clean number. I hope I don't die too soon and ruin this nice, even lifetime, because the next one will be hell. In the early 1980s, I was drifting across the country, picking up odd jobs here and there. I have a lot of stories to tell, but the worst story is about the time I spent as a forest fire lookout in Montana. I'm not going to give too many specifics of where this took place, and the names have been changed out of respect and protection for those who were involved and able to move on. I haven't been so lucky, but it's been long enough, and I need to get this off my chest. Working as a lookout is fairly boring, even if you love the outdoors and being alone. A person could go stir crazy after a week, and some did. The turnover rate for lookouts was actually pretty high back then. The one thing that helped combat this was the radio. We had one long-range radio for calling items in and giving our check-in report to dispatch, and one short-range radio that let us talk to other lookouts in our area. We kept logs of most things, which makes the writing of this story fairly easy, but the conversations will be mostly from memory, so I'll be as accurate as that allows. It was late in the season, the mornings were becoming chilly, and I woke with a sore throat. After making some tea on the stove, I started a fire in the heater and sat down to enjoy my view. I could see for miles and could just about make out another tower across the valley. Heavy fog played between the pines, which I hoped would burn off quickly, as it made picking out smoke a lot harder. Hope you're not sleeping in again. The radio squawked. I reached over and picked it up. Nah, I'm awake, Roy. Getting cold up here, though. Yeah, it's gonna get worse too. Hope you brought some long johns. Should be able to survive another week. How's that ankle? The radio played static as he blew out a breath. Still hurts like a bitch, but I'll survive. The trek for water is gonna suck something terrible, though. I told you to call it in. You're gonna do more damage to it. Roy had twisted his ankle the day before while making the walk to the outhouse. We teased him relentlessly about it. Nah, it'll be fine. Ain't the first time someone messed up their ankle. Besides, if I give it a few days, it'll be good as new. Yeah, I doubt you'll stay off it for that long. Nah, I gotta. Besides, I need to check things out in the woods before our time is up here. Check things? What kind of things? Ed, just noticed some strangeness, and I want to know what's causing it. Ain't nothing to worry about. Probably just me seeing things again. Anyway, I'm gonna get my jugs together. You got watch? Yeah, nowhere to be but here. I said and sat back in my chair and listened to static. Once in a while conversations from other stations would bleed in, but most of it was unintelligible. A little before 4:30 the evening check-ins started over the radio. There were the normal voices, save for one. Roy didn't check in. Station 525, check in please. I grabbed the short-range radio and called for him. No answer. I cursed. Hey, station number 516 here. I spoke to Roy this morning. He was going out to get water. With that messed up leg of his? Jesus Christ, what an idiot. Rose said in her usual dour voice. She was on the other side of Roy, and apparently they did not get along. Betty's laying out there, lame as a cow. Shit, Kurt said. He was the dispatcher on that night. Fuck. Who's closest to his tower again? Hell no, ain't no way I'm going out looking for him. He's probably sleeping somewhere. Rose said, I'll do it. I said and sighed as I started to get on my boots. You're a cliffside from him. Kurt said, yeah, and I've made the trek back in the beginning of summer, remember? When we had issues with the radios during that storm and lighting strike. This will be a cakewalk in comparison. Fuck. Rose, can you please do it? I don't need another dipshit death on my hands. You're an ass, Kurt. I said, truth hurts. I lost like 6 years of my life when you made that trek. She's closer. God damn it, you baby's fine. If I get mauled by a bear, I'm gonna haunt both your asses. I chuckled, like a bear would stick around as you bitched about it getting blood on your shirt. Haha, fuck you, she said, and the radio went to static as I continued to get ready. The walk to Roy's lookout wouldn't be easy, but I didn't trust Rose to actually go out and look. I grabbed my pack and the short-range radio and called in. Luckily, it was still light out until almost 8, which gave me a few hours. I'm going down in the valley. We're off shift now, so shouldn't be a problem. What the fuck you going in the valley for? Kurt asked. So I can hear if Rose gets mauled by a bear. You're just full of jokes tonight, aren't you, Drifter? I didn't respond, and after a few minutes she called in that she was going out looking. I left around the same time. It was a chilled evening, the kind that announced the coming of autumn. I dug my light jacket out of my pack and started down the trail. It took almost 2 hours to reach the halfway point between my and Roy's lookout, because climbing down a cliffside, even when it's on an angle, takes some time. I sat down for a water break and pulled out the radio. Anything yet, Rose? I called and received static back in answer. Probably still too far away. 15 minutes, and I was back on the trail. The sun was almost kissing the top of the trees when I reached the base of Roy's lookout. I went up the steps, calling out his name as I went. When I reached the top, I found someone else already there, sitting in the chair at the desk. She was a slender woman with red hair tied in a dirty ponytail. The glare she gave me through the window told me exactly who she was. You just get here? I asked as I opened the door. The place was in shambles. She tossed a book she was holding and dropped her hands to her thighs with a slap. She cocked her head and narrowed her eyes at me. Figured it was you, and that annoying voice of yours just confirmed it. What the fuck you doing here, Drifter? You mean to tell me I hiked my ass across sappy pines and poison ivy, and you were coming anyway? You didn't answer when I radioed. I said and let my gaze travel the lookout. What happened here? We had a party, you're late. It was my turn to glare. I don't know, shit was like this when I got here. He's a slob, no surprise there. Maybe, but this isn't because he's a slob. This place looks tossed. I went to the map in the center of the room and looked through the site of the Osborne. Like someone was looking for something. Like what? Not like there is anything important here. No, but this is strange. I said and stepped away from the Osborne and motioned to it. Check out where he was looking last. She moved over and looked through the site and then shrugged. He was looking toward my tower. So, why? I don't know, maybe he was gonna come visit or some shit. He kept. She broke off and shook her head. No, he ain't that stupid. What? Kept saying he saw lights in the woods by me. But I ain't never seen any, and I was looking right where he told me to. He's gone nuts, man. Crazy train. So what? You think he made the hike on a busted ankle over there? What kind of lights was he seeing? I don't know. She sat down on the bed. I don't know. He was getting antsy the last few nights. kept saying he was gonna check it out himself since I wouldn't. I sat down at the desk and started to look through it. His radio is busted. What? I held up the broken receiver. Might be why he didn't call in. So what? We got some idiots out here. Wouldn't be the first time. Joe, remember him? He told me stories about Hicks coming out here and messing with the fire lookouts. She leaned back on the bed. But that was always the off-season. This is like... She paused and cursed as she brought up her hand. There was a smudge of red across her palm. What the fuck? What the fuck? She repeated as she staggered away from the bed. Why the fuck is there blood on the bed? I rushed over and lifted the covers. There were 3 rags, each stained red. I looked back at Rose as she desperately tried to wipe it off on the floor, cursing the entire time. There wasn't that much, could have easily come from a cut, or Roy wasn't being truthful about how badly he messed up his ankle. It's nothing. It's his goddamn blood, probably gonna get AIDS or some shit. Fuck! She slapped her hand against the floor and dragged it across it again, leaving a long streak of red. Look, I'll go out and look for him. You head back before it gets dark. I said and looked out the windows. The sky was mostly clear with only clouds at the edge of the horizon. The moon would be bright enough to travel by. Nah, no way. If you get lost, I'm just gonna have to go looking again. I'd feel safer if you weren't following me. I said with a grin, and she gave me the finger and then dug into her shirt pocket. She removed a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. She lit one. Then you can follow me. I don't really care. We head back to my lookout, since that seems to be our best bet, and when we find him I'm gonna kick the old kook in the nuts so hard he's gonna spit them out his mouth. I'm gonna need you to carry him out after that. I sighed. We go that way, and we're gonna have to spend the night in your lookout. I got an outhouse you two can sleep in. She blew out a puff of smoke with a grin. You know, I came out here to get away from shits like you two. It was nice and quiet for a time. Then you two showed up, and were always gibbering on the radio like 2 lovers. Don't be jealous, I said as I held out my hand. She took it, and I hauled her to her feet. Shut up, or I'll shove you down the stairs. Ah, now you get why I didn't want you following me. She said nothing as she walked out the door, and I heard her stomp down the steps. It was going to be a fun hike. The shadows were long by the time Rose called a stop for a break. I could just make out her tower between the trees, but we were still a couple of miles out. She offered me some of her water once she had gulped down some. Thanks, got my own. I didn't poison it. That thought didn't even cross me mind, but now it did. I said as I got my water bottle out of my pack. She shrugged and leaned back against the tree and closed her eyes. She looked tired, her face smudged with dirt and sap. There was also something else off about her, but I couldn't quite place it, like she was holding back something. I stared at her, trying to figure out the reason it felt that way. Stop leering at me like I'm meat, she said, and I cocked a brow at her when she opened her eyes again. I could feel you. Sure thing. Why was Roy going on about lights in the woods? Probably because we're in the middle of nowhere with only guineas for power, so it's a bit strange. I don't know about you, but I ain't wasting fuel to fuck with Roy. But I didn't see no lights either. He's losing it, told you that. She took a deep breath and then blew it out as she looked east, and then sat up. Shit. What? Storm. She nodded over, and I looked to see thunderheads pushing through the once clear sky. Fucking Kurt, he didn't say a damn word about it. There weren't any storms on the radar when Kelly was on station. Well, unless we're going as nuts as Roy, I'd say we better hurry our asses inside before it hits. What about Roy? She stood and stretched. Look, what you want to do. We get caught in that storm, and there's a good chance we don't make it out. Look at the size of the bastard, it's almost biblical. Yeah, but... Do what you like, Drifter. But fuck you if you think I'm gonna go looking for some old guy in the middle of a storm. She started off down the trail, and I looked back at the storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance. We reached her tower, and from its clearing we could see the storm rolling across the valley. Rain fell from it like sheets, obscuring the forest of pines and fog and lines. It was slow-moving once it hit the valley, but that wasn't exactly a good thing. It would take up most of the night. I decided, and hated myself for it, that we'd look for Roy once it blew over. Rose argued for a few minutes, but let me into the tower after I pushed my way in. She snarled at me like some rabid dog, but said nothing more. We started to hunker down, boarding windows that we could and securing the door. The storm hit like a sheer wind. The tower rocked and danced to the music of thunder and rain. The little light in the center of the room struggled to stay on, and Rose started to get out the lanterns. "Fucking Roy," she said as she placed the last lantern down on her desk. "Don't they do psych evaluations or some shit? Letting a crazy ass up here like him. What did he think the lights were? What? Why he care so much? What did he think they were?" She shrugged. "I don't know, just was freaked about them." "Why you care?" "Look out the window," I said and stood. When I first noticed them, I thought they were a reflection of the lightning, but they were growing brighter, becoming almost beams through the trees. Rose turned in her seat and then stood with a start. "He's fucking with us," she said. Her voice had a slight tremble in it. "That's gotta be it. He hooked up lights or some shit." "In the middle of a storm?" I said and practically pressed my face against the glass. The lights were moving, far too quickly to be someone running the woods. "You're seeing this, right? Don't make no sense." She turned and dug into the chest at the foot of her bed. I turned when I heard the cock of a shotgun. "It's coming closer." "What are you gonna do with that?" "You don't know what's coming." I stalked over. "What's coming? What are you talking about?" "Just trust me, we're gonna need this." I looked back at the window. The light was moving through the trees, beams shining in every direction, and it was quickly making its way up the valley and toward us. I watched it shoot along the edge of the ridge, and then dip down and up. In a flash it darted up the hill the lookout was on, a ball of light that practically blinded us. The tower rumbled harder than from any wind and tossed us on our asses and shook everything else to the floor. The shotgun in Rose's hand went off with a bang, and the light went out, leaving us in darkness. I sat up with a start and looked around in the dark. I couldn't make out anything, my eyes still trying to adjust. I reached back, and my hand landed on Rose's foot. She groaned as I pulled on it, and I saw the movement as she sat up. Rain was pouring in through the windows, splashing us both. "What the fuck was that?" she said, her voice hoarse. "Don't ask me. Jesus." There was a thump from somewhere below us, low and quiet. We both froze, and her hand found mine as I slowly stood. The thump came louder. A thump, and then silence. A thump, and then silence. "Rosie," a gurgled voice called from below us. My veins went cold. "Rosie!" A hacking cough echoed up the stairs, and I felt Rose scramble for the shotgun. I went for one of the lanterns and turned it on. "Who the hell is that? What the hell is going on?" I said and flipped the light on as I turned to Rose. Her face was only a foot away, her eyes wide and her skin speckled with rain. "Help me for the heel," the voice called, almost crying in a gurgling way. "Ruos. It sounds like Roy," I said as I went to one of the windows. "That don't sound like fucking anyone." "No, listen to how he's walking." "Shit, it's gotta be him." I went to the door, but she slammed her body against it. "What? You ain't going out there. He needs our help." She shook her head. "That ain't Roy." "What?" She swallowed hard and wiped at her face. "Okay, look, just listen to me. Rose, you better start making sense real soon." She shoved me back with the gun. "I've seen this before." "Seen what?" 2 years ago I was out here, and some idiot camper got lost. His friends said there were lights and shit in the woods the night he disappeared. We were pulled in to help look, and we found him. Still waiting for sense. She snarled. He weren't the same anymore. Barely alive, tubes moved his blood, eyes gouged out. We thought he attacked the ranger that was with us, tore her to shreds before we could do a thing. That ain't Roy down there. What are you saying happened to him? She shook her head. "I don't know, we don't know. We thought some serial killer was about the woods, but no one would talk about. Not the sheriff or the doc that looked at him. People were zipped, and I was told not to say a word about it to anyone. So the lights. I saw them, and I ignored them just like I told Roy to." She sniffed and wiped at her nose. "But he couldn't let it be. Kept talking on the radio to me about. Kept poking at what happened. I didn't think it was the same, but now." Lightning lit a silhouette outside the windows. It was wet and sick-looking, like a person who was about to keel over at any moment. Rose turned to it, and the silhouette lumbered toward the door and smashed it open. It gave a gurgling scream for Rose, and then my ears went ringing from the blast of the shotgun. It didn't go down. She fired again. It stumbled, but still made its way toward us. She fired once more and the blood splattered us as the silhouette finally dropped down at our feet. It was too dark to see much of anything even with the lantern, but I saw the jacket the silhouette wore. I remembered it from when I first arrived at dispatch and met a gray-bearded man who was gearing up to head for his lookout. Roy. Morning found us both wide awake and staring at the body before us. It was almost like a horror show as the light crept through the windows, illuminating the floor and the body at our feet. It was Roy, but it wasn't Roy. Large tube, things traveled down his neck, the ribs showing under the red and white skin. His jaw was slack, teeth missing, and his tongue was twice the normal size, sticking out almost like a dog's. His clothes were torn, rags basically, in most places. He was bald and his beard was gone, shaved smooth. I couldn't take my eyes from him. Morning check-in. Let's hear it, guys and gals. You all alive after that storm? The radio squawked and rose, and I looked at each other. It was Kelly. Station 516 and 532. Need a check-in from you big time. Kurt has been pissing his pants since last night. Give the lad a break. What do we tell them? She asked and looked over to me, her eyes red and bruised. I mean, what do we? I don't know. Who told you not to tell anyone about the lights? Government types, I don't know. They just made me sign a bunch of papers and shit. Told me it was a serial killer working in the woods like we had thought. But I stood slowly and stepped over Roy's body. I tried to not step in his blood, but it covered the floor. I picked up the receiver and after a deep breath answered. This is station 532. I'm here with Rose. Storm cut me off last night. Well, damn, kiddo. We thought you were lost too. Rose didn't try to shoot you when you came over. I laughed a little, it was forced. Nah, she's been a good host. Didn't even make me stay in the outhouse. Good to hear. You find anything about Roy? He didn't make it. Shit. Yeah, storm hit before I could call it in. His body. I looked down at the corpse and shivered. It was a bear attack. Wasn't much left. You gotta be kidding me. Shit. Well, at least we got people here already to help. People? I asked and looked over to Rose. She sat up, the gun clutched to her chest. Yeah, storm did a lot of damage last night. We got some government helpers here. They were wanting to head up toward Roy's place as soon as they heard he was missing, but I wanted to get in touch with you too. Government? I said, my brain trying to keep up. Yeah, you know, like rangers and shit. They're heading your way now, so you two just sit tight, and once you show them where Roy is, we'll get you out of there. Sounds good. Thanks. I put the radio down and looked at Rose, and then at the body. Fuck. They come here and it's the same shit. I've seen it twice now. They ain't just gonna let me walk out, no way. It was a bear attack. I said and looked up. That ain't no bear. She said as she got to her feet. It was a bear attack and there was nothing left. I bent down and started to drag Roy's body outside. I then tossed him over the rail. My stomach flipped at the sound his body made when it hit the ground. This won't work, Drifter. It's Sean, I said and picked up my pack. My name is Sean. You don't have to come, I can handle it. No, I'll come. We spent the morning making a scene, scattering Roy's clothes in the forest. We burned his body and buried what was left. It took time, and when a group of men and women showed up at the head of the trail, Rose and I were wiped out at the bottom of the steps sharing a cigarette. It was a bear attack. I showed them where, and while the more strict of those in the group seemed dubious, we were let out of the forest. They asked us about if we'd seen anything strange, any lights. We laughed, told them it was the middle of the forest, where would lights come from? Rose and I have kept in touch over the years. She actually went back out a few times, but never saw the lights again. I've seen them twice now, never met anyone again, but sometimes I wonder if they're following me, whoever or whatever they are.